world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Thursday, January 8th, as you are listening to this. And of course, we've got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, you may have noticed that I was missing from the podcast the last couple of days, and I barely had any TikToks up. Well, I had some stuff going on. Life got in the way. I was lucky enough that I did not have to work on top of dealing with the things I was dealing with. And it just took a lot of my time and a lot of my focus. And I did have free time one of those nights to sit down, and I was going to record some TikToks, and I ended up getting roped into a live, which I'm not complaining about because I enjoy being on the lives over on TikTok. And I was up there for like 3 hours, something like that. I don't remember exactly how long we were live. But that took a big chunk of the free time I ended up having that I was going to use to record. And with everything else I was dealing with, it didn't work out. It was affecting everything I had going on with sleep-wise and things like that. Now, I don't get too deep into my personal lives here, but one of the things that I was dealing with was making the decision in this economy between getting a different vehicle or fixing my car. My car needed some major repairs, and it's an older car. So I was debating between fixing it and putting the money into it versus not fixing it, getting something different, getting a loan, having a car payment, all of those kind of things. And that was just one of the things I was dealing with, but it was taking up a considerable amount of my time trying to dig into the weeds, deal with banks and look at payments and figures, and it was a mess. So got that all straight. And hopefully I am back on track. Now I'm recording this later in the night than I would normally like to record this for Thursday. So there is a chance it doesn't end up getting posted potentially until Friday morning. But I have plans to record a Friday podcast as well. So you could be getting a double dose of the Analytical Iowan podcast that way and getting a second episode pretty quick. One other thing I wanted to touch on is Spotify. And I'm going to keep posting over on Spotify. For those of you that are listening on Spotify, I want to apologize to you for being so far behind. I don't have Spotify automated like I do everything else. Everything else, basically, once I get it recorded and I can get it posted, if it's a TikTok, the minute it gets posted, basically it gets transmitted out to YouTube and Blue Sky, and I get the audio ripped out for Spotify for me almost automatically, and it's done within a matter of minutes. When it comes to the podcast, using that same service, I have to, once I get it into my Google Drive, then it gets uploaded for me to YouTube and the audio gets pulled out and all of those things, which is one of the things that I like because with having a job on top of trying to do all of this, it does make having the time to do everything a little more difficult. Okay. So having it automated does help, but working on getting through all of that and getting things situated and still trying to figure out a better way to get Spotify up and going. I am not going to go back and update Spotify. I'm just going to bring it current from Thursday, I think, because a lot of what we talked about in the days in between has been pretty much made irrelevant, or the news cycle moves so fast that there are more things that we are talking about um, than what was going on. In whatever day it was that I had those podcasts recorded and those TikToks recorded. So I got through all the personal stuff, and I'm going to be hopefully back on track now to try to get uh, content out more reliably now that I got those things dealt with. So that's kind of where that was. If you were wondering what was going on, I know a lot of you look to me for the facts and my take on what is going on in the world. Now, I don't consider myself a journalist. I'm not out gathering the story. I'm looking into the stories as reported by others and giving you my take based on the facts I am seeing. I'm more of a political commentator than I am a journalist at this point. I don't have contacts within the political sphere to make, to get access to those stories. I wish I did. That would be better. I wish I could break news like some of the other big creators, but instead I take what they can get for me and the other stories that other people cover, um, and I give you my breakdown. And I hope that brings you some value to what is going on. Now, I'm going to start with the big story that happened. This would have been yesterday. Maybe even depending on how late it takes before this gets posted, it might even be 2 days ago. This was on Wednesday. There was a shooting in Minneapolis. You may have seen the video by now. There was a woman in an SUV. Apparently, there was an ICE roadblock or something. Not exactly sure how the altercation with ICE started, but one member of ICE was like leaning in, talking to her through the window. He backed up. He was away from the vehicle. She starts to pull away from them, and it looked like the partner of the agent, who was standing several feet in front of the vehicle, pulls the weapon and fires several times, hitting her in the face, um, and she ultimately died. Now, what ultimately ended up happening, there was a paramedic, or there was a doctor, I guess, on scene. He was trying to get over there to help, and ICE basically said, "We don't care. Ambulance is on the way," and refused to let this doctor over to do any sort of treatment or any sort of first aid. And then apparently, when the ambulance and the EMS got there, they were blocked by ICE for 15-ish minutes. Her name was, I believe it was Renee Good. Um, and she was an American citizen, or was an American citizen, not a criminal, not a domestic terrorist, not an immigrant, not here undocumented, none of those things. ICE really had no reason to detain her. Um, and ultimately, she was trying to leave. She was trying to get away. They were not in direct fear of their life, or at least they shouldn't have been. But we are finding out that these ICE agents are not properly trained. I saw a TikTok right before recording this where there's a news story coming out, and if this story is true, I have not verified it through other sources, just this TikTok, that they have shrunk the training period down for ICE agents down from 47 days all the way to, or down from the regular amount of days down to 47 because of Donald Trump. Well, you're telling me you can have a fully trained ICE agent who knows all protocols and everything in a program that would probably take months. You can have them field ready in 47 days. There's no way. Um, there's just no way that you could have them field ready in 47 days. And you have a lot of these people, we find out they're not meeting the physical requirements that would normally be there. They're having to waive some of the requirements. I did a story on it a while back where they were talking about the requirements, and they said that they were that the candidates were athletically allergic, which I thought was great. I thought that was a great way to describe somebody who was out of shape. As somebody who is out of shape themselves, being athletically allergic fits. I don't want to be out doing uh, calisthenics and all of those kind of things. I don't want to go run a 10K. So you could say I'm athletically allergic. Sure, I'd go with that. Now, this whole story is problematic for ICE, in part because it wasn't an immigrant, it wasn't a criminal, and it wasn't a minority. And this is going to wake up potentially some of the MAGA base. Now, of course, we are already seeing some members of the MAGA movement, some of the diehards are already saying the same things. Well, you just should have complied. She should have complied. But here's the problem. They can't have it both ways. She was unarmed, apparently not doing anything wrong, trying to leave, and she was shot by an ICE agent. Well, then they turn to, you have Ashley Babbitt. And if you don't remember who Ashley Babbitt is, it's fitting that we're bringing her up this time of year because just a couple days ago was the 5-year anniversary of January 6th. She was the only person killed during the insurrection on January 6, 2021. She was coming through a window. She was one of the first ones through a second floor window as they were climbing the outside of the building. And she was told by the officer to back up, to stop, to not come in, and she was not obeying orders and was shot. Well, the answer to that should be why didn't she comply? But they MAGA wants to raise her up as a hero, that she was wrongfully killed by police. Well, now you have another woman, same situation, was trying to avoid an interaction with the police, was shot and killed. Is it just follow orders, or was she wrongfully shot? And they're going to have trouble reconciling that, I think. But on top of this is another thing that this administration is going to have to answer for. Now, we are hearing that there are more Republicans talking about impeaching Kristi Noem. I think it was Kristi Noem. Yeah, because she is the head of Department of Homeland Security, where ICE is under their jurisdiction. And they're wanting to, because of this, among other things that have happened involving ICE. And the Republican Party is fracturing. And as we're going to be talking about with a couple of the other stories that I'm going to cover, they're starting to split. The cracks are forming in the Republican Party. And as much as we think they should be able to just open their eyes and see it, they probably do. But they're trying to do things in a way, at least the Republican politicians are trying to do things in a certain way in order to affect elections, right? They're worried about getting reelected, first and foremost. That is their priority. They are worried about whether or not they get the ballot, they get put on the ballot, even because we're coming up to midterm season, or primary season for midterms, I should say. They're worried about winning their primary and then worried about getting the win on that ballot come November. Now, with that, the cracks are forming, and they're looking at the math and going, okay, when do we split from Donald Trump? When do we pull the brakes on the administration? When is the outrage high enough? Now, I saw another creator, another popular creator, who apparently was out protesting ICE today and said they weren't doing anything wrong. They were doing nothing illegal. They were just out protesting. They were nonviolent, and it was ICE or law enforcement or somebody hit them with pepper spray, tear gas, something like that. And that's the kind of reaction you are going to get from this administration. They don't want us out in the streets. They don't want us complaining. They don't want us uh, using our voices and our First Amendment rights, talking about the things that are happening. They firmly believe the more and more they say things, the more we are going to believe it. And that's just not the case. Now, this ICE situation is only going to continue to escalate as far as the outcry. Um, the mayor of Minneapolis uh, basically told, in no uncertain terms, pretty much word for word, told ICE to get the fuck out of his city. Uh, and that was pretty telling. Governor Tim Walz has now said that he is talking about calling out the National Guard to keep the peace and is going to help get ICE out of Minneapolis. And that they are going to potentially be looking into an investigation here, even if the federal government does not cooperate, um, because there could be state level charges. Now, uh, JD Vance, who has been trying to stay out of sight, came up, popped his head up, and said something stupid. Because what else would he say besides something stupid? But he popped his head up and he said, well, yeah, the officer has full immunity. And that is partially true. Typically, police officers have what they call qualified immunity, which in certain situations means the officer can't be charged with certain things if they violate certain laws and restrictions, etc. However, um, in this case, if it wasn't a good shoot, if it wasn't justifiable, that immunity could go out the window. And there could be state level, potentially manslaughter or murder charges. Um, and it probably would still be murder. It wouldn't be first degree murder, because when he pulled his weapon and fired, he had the intent to kill somebody. You don't you don't pull your weapon, despite what the movies tell you. There is never the intent should never be, oh, I'm going to just shoot them in the leg, or I'm going to try to do it non-lethally. That's the stuff of movies. These officers, even if they are given limited training, if you've had any sort of firearm training at all, you are trained that if you shoot to kill. I have had very limited experience with firearms, but I did take, in my college days, I took a law class. And one of the things we covered in that law class, they talked about things like self defense. And if you use a weapon in self defense, how that applies, um, and where the distinction is, right? Like, if somebody's coming after you and you are genuinely in fear of your life and you shoot and shoot to kill, you can use self defense. But if you shoot to injure, you could end up it could end up being a negligence claim or something like that, where you could end up financially owing the person money. It's weird. The law falls into some weird categories like that. So they're trained to shoot to kill. So he had every intent to, when he pulled his weapon and fired into the vehicle where this woman was at, and this was a mother who had kids. Um, he had every intent to kill her. So there could be state level charges for him, and I think there should be. Now we will see how that all plays out through uh, the criminal justice system, and we know how slow the criminal justice system is. It is not a fast process, not in the least. But that's also neither here nor there. We will have to see how that all plays out. Okay. Now let's get into the news of today. And here's where I start talking about there being fractures. I touched on it a little bit when it came to impeaching uh, Kristi Noem, that we're hearing more Republicans are coming on board with this idea because of how ICE is doing things. It's just telling me that the Republican Party is starting to break. Now, there was a vote in the U.S. Senate today on a war powers resolution. And this war powers resolution uh, was basically going to limit Donald Trump's ability to use the military further in Venezuela. Now, I haven't been here for a couple of days on the podcast, but with Venezuela, he sends the military in, captures Maduro, and then basically wants to say, problem solved. Well, he's also talking about we don't know how long how our occupation of Venezuela is going to take and what that's going to look like. Well, the Senate today passed a war powers resolution, and several Republicans, it was either 5 or 7 Republicans in the Senate, um, broke ranks and sided with all Democrats to pass this war powers resolution, which would limit Donald Trump's ability to further use the military in Venezuela. However, it's still got to go through the House. It's a far cry from being a guaranteed thing. Well, House of Representatives probably isn't going to pick up on it. They're probably not even going to take it up. And even if they do, Donald Trump is not going to sign it, and they don't have the momentum yet to overturn his veto on this measure. Now, the more public outcry there is about the things going on with Venezuela, that could always change. Now, when it comes to Venezuela, one of the things they are talking about is that we are going to start getting oil from Venezuela that Donald Trump claims he is going to be selling for Venezuela on the open market. And we're getting a percentage of the profits, basically. And Donald Trump is going to be the only one to decide how those profits are spent. Now, none of that is legal. First of all, why does he think we get any of Venezuela's oil? They didn't steal it from us, despite his claims. They have oil fields, they have oil reserves. It is their oil. There is no, it was never property of the United States, but he likes to say that they stole it from us. Beyond that, why does he think he gets to be the one to play businessman and make all of these decisions? Shouldn't he be busy, one, running the country, doing things for the everyday American? But he's not. He's worried about this oil. Well, again, we shouldn't just get the oil, and we have no guarantee that Venezuela is going to give up this oil freely. Why? Well, the new president, Delcy Rodriguez, basically said that anybody who helped the United States conduct the raid that got Maduro is going to be found, arrested, and charged if they are within Venezuela's borders. So that does not sound like somebody who is going to be cooperative with the United States. Now, he thinks he gets to decide, and sell this oil, and he gets to play businessman. And none of that is legal. None of that is within the powers of the president. Beyond that, he wants to say that he gets complete control over all of the money, the money that comes from Venezuelan oil. Well, that's not how that works. In the United States, we have one treasury, period. And any money that comes in is supposed to go to the treasury. And because we are in deficit spending, all money in goes out right away to cover bills. And because we are in deficit spending, we are constantly borrowing money to pay interest on the money we have previously borrowed. It's a continual fight within the American political system. And the only way to fix that would be to start running a surplus. And the last time we ran a surplus was under the Clinton administration. Now, he wants to put the money into a separate, like, offshore account, like you would do if you were running your business. And this is probably pretty telling This is probably how he ran his businesses, which is why they all went under, right? Whether they were successful or not, he was probably cooking the books in some way because you don't come up with this kind of a strategy out of the blue. This seems like, especially when you are in the mental state of somebody like Donald Trump, who doesn't appear to be in his right mind a lot of the time. Um, you don't just come up with this. This is you're falling back on things you have done in the past, right? And I think that's where he's at. He knows he used to do this when he was in business, or at least that's what my assumption, that he used to do this in business. So he figures he can skim the money off the top, put it in an offshore account. He says he gets complete control of it. And well, no one's going to be the wiser, even though he's talking about it. This whole thing, he mentioned early on that they were going to create what he called a sovereign wealth fund. And a lot of countries that have them are not in deficit spending. They have excess money. And they basically, what he wants is effectively money in the treasury. He wants us to not be constantly paying out money out of our debts. But he says he called it back then the sovereign wealth fund, um, to deal with having like separate money that wouldn't automatically go to pay bills. And that is also typical Donald Trump. We hear he does not pay his bills and he likes to extend his creditors as far as he possibly can. So he's talking about this with the Venezuelan oil. Now, we don't know and if this is even going to be happening. If it is, this goes along with something I have been saying for a while. When Donald Trump is gone and a Democrat is back in power, hell, when the Democrats are just in control of the House, I think they could do this because Congress has the power of the purse. There needs to be a full forensic audit of the United States books. Go in, pick a date. I don't care what that date is, and I don't care which administrations get burned. I don't care if you want to go back to the beginning of the Clinton administration. I wouldn't care if you wanted to go back to the beginning of the Carter administration. That might be going a little far, but you pick a date, whatever date that could be. I don't know how far back they want to go, but you start looking at the books and go through and figure out where every dollar went and figure out what was cut. Who authorized the money to go wherever? Were there authorized signatures on the documents, etc., and figure out what's going on here. And if there is money offshore, etc., figure out, how do we get it back into the treasury and use it for its intended purpose? See, Donald Trump thinks he can do these kind of things that he is by saying, oh, well, I'm going to get in control of the Venezuelan oil and I'm going to be selling it and we're going to make money on it, but I'm going to put it in an offshore account that only I can touch. He thinks his base, and a certain portion of his base is going to cheer this because they are going to think it means something other than what it means. What it means is he's screwing us over. Point blank, he's screwing us over. He is taking from us and giving to himself like he always does. Donald Trump doesn't do anything for the everyday person if he can get away with it. He has problems with that. He's only worried and his only focus is helping himself. And I think between Venezuela, this ICE attack, and everything, ultimately, he's going to end up having to face some accountability as his own party will probably turn on him at some point. Now, moving on from Venezuela, there was a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives today. There was a couple votes, actually. And they tried to overturn two of Donald Trump's vetoes. Now, these were two non-controversial bills at the time they were originally passed by both chambers of Congress. I believe they were basically both passed by universal consent or something very close to it. I think one of the chambers, I think the House, for at least one of them, held a voice vote, which was basically everybody in favor say aye, those opposed say nay. Which side's louder, right? They don't even bother calling out everybody by name. It's not one of the ones where you had to attach your name to it. And they both passed resoundingly with bipartisan support. Now, one of them had to deal with returning part of the Everglades, I believe, in Florida back to a Native American tribe. And I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the tribe because I'm probably going to get it wrong. But this seemed like a non-controversial bill. The other one had to do with Colorado and money for a drinking water pipeline. Again, seemed like a very non-controversial issue. But Donald Trump gets involved. He vetoes both of these and comes up with a bunch of BS reasons, basically, oh, it's wasteful and why should we spend money on that? That's a state problem, blah, 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 blah. You know the drill. You know how Donald Trump operates. But they passed with a wide enough margin in both chambers that if everybody voted the same, they could easily overturn his veto. So it looked like something stupid for Donald Trump to veto. Yet it got to the House of Representatives today. They went to overturn his veto. And enough Republican members of Congress, like 3 weeks after voting in favor of these bills, now voted against them. Why? Well, because Donald Trump said to. And there was still a good number of Republicans that broke with Donald Trump and said, no, we're going to vote in favor of these bills. But enough said, okay, Donnie, you're going to get your way, that made it so these didn't pass. Now, this just continues, though, what I'm talking about when it comes to cracks in the Republican Party, because it wasn't just all Democrats saying, let's override the veto. It was bipartisan, just not bipartisan enough. Those are people who were willing to break from Donald Trump on this issue. You had Senate Republicans breaking from Donald Trump on the War Powers Resolution. They're starting to do things like that. And it's going to continue. It's going to continue as we get deeper in to the year, as we get closer and closer to primary season, as we get closer and closer to the midterm elections. Their willingness to break with Donald Trump is going to continue to increase. And it could increase to the point where they decide that it's time to remove Donald Trump because he is no longer an asset to them, but rather a liability. Okay, there was one other vote in the House of Representatives today, and that was on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Now, there had been a discharge petition brought up on these subsidies, and that was going to be voting on a 3-year extension, a 3-year clean extension on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And guess what? It passed. Now, I don't know that it did not pass with enough votes to override a veto. It was only like 230 to whatever, but still more than enough to pass it, right? It's going to go to the Senate. Now, what's the Senate going to do with it? I have no idea. They've already tried to pass a version of this bill, verbatim, basically, and they couldn't. Okay, it had failed once. Now they may ultimately try to take this up, and they may pass it. They might. And I think because allowing the ACA subsidies to expire is going to be bad for the Republicans. Now, a lot of the Republicans that voted with Democrats to extend the ACA subsidies um, are from districts where they have a high percentage of voters that are on the ACA. So they look at it and they go, oh, my people are going to be hurt by this if I don't do something. So they decide to go with it and they're going to vote in favor of extending the ACA. Now, this 3-year extension apparently was going to be backdated to January 1st, and it was going to make it so that those that at least had already enrolled at higher premiums were going to have their premiums reimbursed. Now, they think they have until January 15th to pass something completely, which would be next week. And they may still get something through. I don't know if it is ultimately going to be this 3-year deal. I have been saying for a while, I still think it is going to be a 2-year deal. Now, why do I think it is going to be 2 years? Well, that makes sense, right? 1 year or them expiring, they have to answer questions about the ACA subsidies all the time, all the way through the election. They don't want to do that. They don't want to deal with it. Okay. So that's out. 3 years puts them having to answer the questions during the 2028 general. And if they're looking ahead, they're probably not going to want to do that. Well, 4 years, you're into the next presidential term. Probably not going to want to do that. So that's why I think 2 years makes sense. But either way, they still have to get Donald Trump on board. Now, Donald Trump has kind of said he is willing to be a little more flexible when it comes to extending the ACA subsidies. And one of the big sticking points with extending the subsidies prior to this had been the so-called Hyde Amendment. Now that has been the rule in place that they were trying to make even stricter. These Republicans were when it came to federal dollars and abortion care, and basically they were trying to almost set up a federal abortion ban through the way they set up the ACA subsidies, etc. Basically, the way it sits right now is no federal money since the 70s has ever been allowed to be spent on abortion care of any kind. Well, um, when it comes down to this, what they were trying to do is say if your state allows state money to be spent on abortion care, none of the state money that gets put in to help with the Affordable Care Act, because some states have state level subsidies, etc., that none of the state level money could be applied either. Now, Donald Trump has signaled willingness to back off of that a little bit. And I don't know why they are pushing the abortion ban so hard, why they think it is such a winning strategy, but they do. They think it is a winning strategy. And I know, and I remember growing up very Christian, um, in a very religious household. And I went to a religious private school. And from the age we were old enough to know, what reproduction was and how it all worked and everything else, we were taught as part of our education on that kind of thing. The sex ed wasn't great. It wasn't the best. It was very clinical from what I remember. And but when it came to abortion care, they did not teach us as students what was really going on. It wasn't taught that a lot of the second trimester abortions are because of health risks to the mother, or that it is because of a genetic defect or a quality of life risk or something, or a non-viable fetus problem. None of that was talked about. Of course, it was the religious indoctrination side of it, where it is just a woman who decided one day she doesn't want to be pregnant and decided to kill her baby. That's how it was taught. And I think there's a lot of people who still believe that. In fact, I know several people who, it doesn't matter how outlandish the claim is, if the if the story is coming from either a religious person or somebody who is viewed as extremely religious themselves, automatically gets way more credibility. Automatically. Uh, well, I heard this from, Father so and so. I'm talking to very Catholic members of my family. Well, Father so and so said whatever. Why would they lie? Well, gee, I don't know, to protect themselves. I think that was, you know, I remember there was a friend of mine, his sister, when we were kids, had filed a complaint or had come out with allegations that a priest was inappropriate. And most of the town came out and was defending the priest automatically. Well, why would a priest do that? They're a man of God. First line of defense was, they're a man of God. They wouldn't do that. Couldn't even open their mind to the thought or the possibility that they could do that because it was a religious issue. So going back to these ACA subsidies, Donald Trump has said that he seems a little more willing. So we're going to see what happens with the Senate and them taking up these ACA subsidies if they ultimately get voted on, and if they ultimately get passed, and then how Donald Trump deals with that. It would be in his best interest for them to get passed and to protect the healthcare for as many Americans as as they can. Healthcare is out of control in this country. The ACA has done a decent job of fixing it or trying to make it better. And one of the problems is Republicans don't have an answer because it's effectively their plan. This is basically the same plan that was put in place by the then Republican governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney. This is effectively Romney Care. And they don't have an answer. They don't. So that is an issue when it comes to them trying to replace the ACAs. They don't know what to replace it with because we took their idea, basically. Okay, moving on. Another story that came out today, and this isn't the first time Donald Trump has floated this idea. He is floating the idea of giving checks to every member of Greenland, every citizen of Greenland, to join the United States. And he's talking about giving them checks of $10,000 to $100,000. Now, sorry about that pause there. I couldn't remember if I'd already talked about it in this podcast, and if I did, I apologize if I'm repeating myself. But anyway, he's talking about giving them checks of anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000, and these checks are going to be if they agree to join the United States. Though Donald Trump has been pushing once again for Greenland. And he said they haven't ruled out military intervention and they need Greenland. It's for national security and all of these things. Okay. Well, one, why does he want Greenland so bad? Well, it's a huge landmass. And it would be adding a bunch of territory to the United States. And depending on how they did it, assuming Greenland doesn't even want to become a part of the U.S. anyway. So this is all hypothetical. But if they did, I'm assuming Donald Trump would try to push for them to become a state right away. Well, he could go down as the first president since the 50s or the late 40s to add a state. And wow, look at his legacy. That's part of it. But the big chunk of it has to do with natural resources and rare earth minerals and things like that. Greenland has a large chunk of resources, and I think that's what he wants to develop. And I think he would try to do something similar with Greenland to what he is talking about doing with Venezuela when it comes to the oil. And that is, well, I get a cut, I get to sell it all, to put a percentage in an offshore account that only I get to control. Now, we have never had a U.S. president have control of finances like that because our founding fathers never wanted them to have finances controlled in an offshore account. Now, as far as whether or not we can do this Greenland thing, Congress would have to pass it. And I don't think that's going to happen. But he's talking $10,000 to $100,000 for the citizens of Greenland. Now there are 57,000 citizens in Greenland. Not a large population. Okay, about the size of a small U.S. city. And we're still talking anywhere from, what would that be? Half $500 million to $6 billion, somewhere in that ballpark. That's a lot of money. Now, where's that money going to come from? Well, he's talking about potentially, I'm guessing he's going to say, well, I'll use the tariff money. But I thought the tariff money was going to go toward paying rebate checks to everyday Americans. Oh, wait, tariff money's already spent. Can't do that. Well, then you got the oil money from Venezuela that he supposedly is going to be the only one to control. So maybe that's where he's planning to get the money from. Ultimately, I think he's going to need to go to Congress, and I don't think Congress is going to be willing to go along with it. Besides that, Greenland doesn't want to leave the country of Denmark. They have been part of Denmark for ever, since well before the United States was even a country. So where Donald Trump gets the claim for the United States to Denmark is beyond me. Now, if he does try to intervene with Greenland militarily, he would end up potentially setting up a situation militarily where Denmark could invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter. That's true. Okay. And Article 5 has only ever been invoked once, and that was by the United States right after 9/11. But Article 5 is the provision that says an attack against one is an attack against all. Well, Donald Trump doesn't care, right? He wants what he wants, and he thinks he's going to get away with getting whatever he wants. So if he does this, he would risk going up against all of the rest of the NATO nations. But what happens? See, we're also a NATO country. So would NATO really fight against itself? Possibly. And then what happens if we invoke Article 5? Would they have to then try to defend us? Because, if NATO countries, maybe all of them don't side with Denmark, but enough do, would the rest have to side with us? This could be a way to split NATO up. Now, during the Biden administration, there was a defense spending bill. I believe it was in 2024. One of the last defense spending bills Joe Biden signed. There was a provision stuck in there that said any president, does not have the ability to unilaterally leave NATO without congressional approval. So Donald Trump can't just say, yeah, we're out of NATO today and end it like that. He may try, but like everything else Donald Trump does, it would ultimately fail. So don't know where the things are going to end up with Greenland. I think he's going to try this, and something else will capture his attention. Now, everything from Venezuela and capturing Maduro to the ICE agent getting shot and everything and all this coverage, it has been a distraction from the Epstein files. Donald Trump does not want those files released. He does not want to talk about what's in the Epstein files or anything. He wants us to forget they exist. But we're not going to let him off the hook with that. We're going to keep pushing against it and trying to keep the pressure on when it comes to Donald Trump, the Epstein files, and everything that is going on there. Now, today is Friday, or tomorrow is Friday. And it may be Friday when you get into this podcast. By the time I record tomorrow's podcast, we may already have an answer. We had heard earlier in the week that there will be a Supreme Court decision coming out today. Don't know what that decision is, but it potentially could be the tariff case. And Donald Trump, of course, is terrified of having to give up his tariff power. He doesn't want to have to do it because, in part, they would have to pay back all of that tariff money. And they don't know how to do it because, one, we don't even have accurate information as far as how much we have collected in tariffs. We have heard a range of numbers going all the way from like $250 billion to, I think, the highest Donald Trump at one point said it was 19 trillion. We don't know what the ultimate number is going to be and how they're going to send that money back to the companies. Now, the companies, what's going to happen is when they get that money back, it's not going to go back to you and me in the form of lower prices. What's going to happen is there'll be a line item on their profit and loss sheet, basically, for miscellaneous credit, and it's going to look like nothing but pure profit because they already made the tariff money back by charging us more for those products. So it's going to look like they made tons and tons of money in extra profits on this fiscal year, and then they're just going to turn around and give bonuses to their top executives and shareholders and dividends and all those kinds of things. But we are waiting to hear what that is going to what this decision is going to be. So that is something to look forward to for tomorrow, for Friday. Usually Supreme Court does oral arguments around, I think it's 10 a.m. Eastern. And then after oral arguments is when you probably would be expecting whatever this decision could be. It could be tariffs. It could be on the National Guard. It could be on any number of things. But if it is something that breaks with Donald Trump, like I think this tariff ruling is going to, it is going to be just another crack in the Republican Party in this Republican pro-Donald Trump regime. Now, one of the reasons I think the Supreme Court is going to side against Donald Trump is that there is no wording in the law Donald Trump is trying to use as his justification for the tariffs that mention the word tariff at all, or any of its synonyms. Beyond that, right before the Supreme Court heard oral arguments, the Senate passed a resolution, 3 of them actually, with bipartisan support, that said they were trying to end the national emergency declaration that Donald Trump used to invoke the tariffs in the first place. Between those two things, it looks like Congress was saying, hey, we do not give Donald Trump tariff authority. And the law that they pointed to doesn't mention tariff authority. And the Constitution itself says the power to impose duties or taxes, which a tariff is a duty, which is a fancy word for a tax that gets put on something, either import or export. So I think ultimately the Supreme Court is going to side against Donald Trump in this matter. So we are waiting to see what that decision is going to look like tomorrow. Depending on when I get to record tomorrow's podcast, I may have an idea about what they are talking about. And if not, we'll be talking about it on Saturday's podcast. And I will, if I get a chance, depending on my work schedule tomorrow, and when the ruling comes out, again, there may be a TikTok about it early in the day or as early as I know something, or there might be one, um, it might come late at night. We'll have to see how it looks and what the ruling is. And we could be way off base on what this Supreme Court decision is. It could be on nothing big. And it's just that they announced that they were going to be releasing something so that they had um, something there and that they had, a decision come out because they needed to get it out for a timely matter or whatever the case may be. Normally, the Supreme Court is very, very slow when it comes to their decisions, and they only release them as quickly as they have to in order to move things along. Now, if this was closer to May, we'd be looking for decisions coming about every week. So, all right, that is going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. I'm going to be back tomorrow with more TikToks, another podcast, and I will hopefully be back to being caught up over on Spotify for those of you listening or who prefer to listen to me over on Spotify. For those of you who have stuck around and were awaiting for me to return with another podcast, I thank you for waiting for me to come back. I'm also going to be looking into one of these nights, and I don't know when, depending on my work schedule. I am looking at doing another TikTok live event myself, potentially with guests. I don't know yet. Might do it myself. I haven't decided. Um, just depends how work fleshes out over the next couple of days. I also may be looking at another night of getting in and recording with Mike, the Rational Boomer. Again, depending on how schedules line up. So look for that as well. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you have a great day.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.